not every group will probably be doing work that is as charged as anti-racism work. But if something's important to you, it's not unlikely that there will be tensions that will arise because that passion, you feel it passionately, it matters to you, and there may be triggers for you within it, and that's part of why it makes it important to you. We in this group and the community at large had just been really introduced to some very direct anti-racism work. So there was some very direct naming of what racism looks like. And it wasn't blaming. It wasn't necessarily confrontational. However, it was impactful enough that those of us who are white were sitting with some awakening of how we were a part of the problem in ways that we hadn't looked at it that directly. And I think that was the main component. But as well, I think people who identify as Black, Indigenous, people of color were also sitting with the awareness that this was so hard to tolerate and that this needed to change, and this needed to change now. So there was this lot of passion, a lot of feeling, and from a number of different people. And my perspective is that in the group, not only were we dealing with the personal awakening, but we were trying to hold the space for other people to also experience this awakening. And for me, there was a lot more pressure than I was used to taking. Internally, there was more pressure, but externally, there was a lot of pressure. It's work that tends to evoke criticism. And I just was not used to being the person that was fielding it. So I've gotten much better at not taking personally, and we don't get quite as much either. But I was really feeling bad, just generally pretty bad. And I think from that space, I was not as centered I was not that centered in how I was working in the group. I'd really gotten off center. And I believe, that provoked some reactions, which were understandable. I was far too stressed to just be able to say, oh gosh, I'm really sorry, that was really stupid. I was just so stressed, I just didn't have the ability or awareness or stability to do that.
One way of looking at conflict is through the lens of the nervous system. So the mind perceives a threat, and that threat is made sense of through the stories that have been internalized. And patriarchy, capitalism, colonialism, they're all built on a foundation of othering. And this sense of threat, this perceived threat, is then projected onto another. It becomes a fear response in the body.
The anti-racism decolonizing work at a private level, a personal level, an interior level for me has very much been part of the same thing as the work that we've gone through in resolving conflict in this group, even though most of the group are white people. It's still, colonization is something that's happened to all of us, and I think Nancy can speak to that as well. And when I say colonization, I think this applies to other groups forming in DA as well, or anyone who watches this video to think about. We are all brought up to have these expectations of how work looks and what our purpose is, and how we should appear to others in a group and hold on to, I'm going to use the word ego, but it's not big-headed ego. It's just, I have to maintain this, people have to see this picture of me the way I do my makeup in the morning, and this is the picture that I draw.
And so a conflict that maybe could have been quite easily dealt with, possibly, just became really difficult.
As a member of the group who wasn't directly in that conflict, it's scary, because it starts to undermine, you start to question your perception of the group and how it's functioning.
I think it's very difficult to step into a conflict that looks like it's happening between two people. We're trained to not do that. Like, it's their problem, and let's almost pretend it's not happening because it gives people their privacy. but somebody had the courage to step in and offer to facilitate us.
Somebody had the courage to intervene and to speak to the conflict. Because in our culture, particularly white Western culture, we're not encouraged to do that. We don't point at conflict. We lower our heads and we back out of the room and we don't engage. It's trained in us from the time that we are tiny, and it's unhelpful, particularly when you're trying to work as a group of people.
And took quite a bit of time actually spending time trying to sort out what had created the conflict. And it wasn't a meaning making as I thought it would be. Like it wasn't, oh, we misunderstood this. And if we only, it actually turned out we had different working styles, different ways of thinking. And in the process that we were led through very skillfully by Katie Carr, that became clear to me that we had different ways of thinking. And I quit trying to make the person think like me and just gave them more space.
So when two people who were experiencing what felt like unsurmountable relational difficulties, when they trusted me to hold a space for them while they take this decision to lean into the conflict together, I have felt incredibly honoured each time. And I have a sense from the responses of my own body when I sense conflict, how much courage this takes. It's in this particular instance, it's a shift away from me to we, being willing to stay together. Can we stay together through difficult times when our wounded selves might be having a fight or flight response? Can we explore this conflict together and still know we're here for each other, still know that we love each other?
And for me, the conflict resolution process that we went through for some conflict that I was involved in was incredibly helpful. Someone held space for me and another person. She just gave two people space where she held a very safe and secure center for these two people to bring their version of the story.
Creating a space that feels safe enough when the nervous system is activated, and we can think of that nervous system as individual or a group nervous system. We know how we impact upon each other. So creating a safe space is really, really important. And that is something that I have learned through this work with the circle, that it's important to give attention to all of the time. So creating a container and relationships where it's explicit that everything's welcome, and not only when relational difficulties arise.
Yeah, I went into it and I kind of told my first piece, and then you get a couple of turns to dig a bit deeper and dig a bit deeper. And the process was super interesting for me. And I think it's going to be a completely unique way of learning for anyone who goes into it. But for me, what happened is very much seeing myself from an outsider. So trying to explain the thought process that brought me into the conversation that had been so difficult. There's a lot of stuff that brings us into each conversation that we have. So when the conversation goes wrong, our culture is very much, oh, it's gone wrong. I'm right. Of course I'm right, because that's kind of, I'm going to say it. I think it's kind of white supremacist way of being, that I'm always right. Whatever I'm doing, it's got to be right. So what I've got to do then is argue with people who think I'm wrong, or fight them down, and get them to be wrong.
One of the things that's really helped me to be with other people through conflict, and also to be better equipped to navigate conflict myself, to be able to find a place which is deep, true, genuine compassion, and not the triggered me who needs to be right, or needs to feel safe, needs to feel protected, needs to run away or get aggressive, has been the principles of the practice of deep relating. And in particular, a few of the principles, one of them is owning your experience. And that means recognizing that, for example, you're not angry because somebody made you angry, or you're not feeling shame because somebody shamed you. That whatever arises in your experience is yours, and it's there to help better understand what's going on under the surface of conscious awareness.
But in this beautiful safe space, what happened was, I may be right, but this other person's also 100% right. So what's happening in the middle is some miscommunication. And it's not just language, as in the use of words, it's where those words come from and how we're presenting ideas, and do we mean harm? I think there's another thing where people do mean harm, and I think that's the kind of conflict that needs to be unpicked and looked at very carefully by the group. That's not the kind of conflict that we've had generally in our group. People have been wanting to do the right thing, but somehow the communication of that has hurt other people or stepped on people's triggers or painted a picture that is not meaningful to other people, and people have resisted. And then there's been this kind of, but I want this picture to be true for the group, and it's just not true for the whole group.
One of the other principles that has helped me to support other people navigating relational conflict, and has also helped to resource me when I experience conflict in my relationships, help me be able to always find and come back to a place of very deep compassion and respect for the other person that I'm with, is the principle of welcoming everything. And it doesn't mean tolerating everything. It doesn't mean no boundaries, and however someone shows up is okay. We can still create a culture where it's possible to call in abusive behavior. But recognizing that there are 7.8 billion people on the planet, and each one of them has their own subjective experience. Each one of those subjective experiences is true.
And I think we all backed off and reoriented on our work, and that gave us a pause enough where there could be healing and growth, and then we could come back together with more understanding and great affection and trust that we could handle really difficult experiences.
There's always something that unlocks a solution. Whatever conundrum you are in, whatever challenge you are experiencing, there's always something fundamentally quite simple that unpicks that challenge and opens up a world of possibilities. And in that instance, it was someone being brave enough to say, can we explore what's actually happening here? Can we bring it, name it in the room, and speak about it? And I can't place enough value on that. And for me, that comes from the amount of care and compassion and love, genuine love and affection that we feel for one another, that we feel one another's pain, which makes it easy to break some of our own conditioning, to break some of our own preferred ways of being in order to be with the other. And that feels really important.
Just committing to staying in a relationship and caring for the other person, and therefore trying to better understand oneself, right? And how one is entangled with the tensions, with the conflict itself.
I remember at one point in a meeting you said, and there was some feeling in your face when you said it about, well, where is the love in deep adaptation? And I remember when I heard you say it, I thought, yeah, right, easy for you to say. But it reminded me. So, and I do think that there's some nuance to what love means. Sometimes love doesn't mean sentiment and good feelings. Sometimes it means really reaching for that part of you that cares and wants to do good. And
yeah, love can come from the place of fierce care, right? Of fierceness.
A moment I think that was really important is that one of us did step out of the group. And so there was a choice moment about having that person come back in. The conflict wasn't resolved. There were very strong feelings. but there was a commitment that had developed to continue going. And
to do deep adaptation is to keep looking for the love in our situation and in this predicament. And as the predicament, the physical predicament for all of us gets worse, it's going to be more easy to exclude people that are difficult and that bring up scratchy feelings. And the circle that we're in personally, locally, as well as these groups that we work in within deep adaptation, are going to get smaller and smaller, and nothing can be done. So actually, it's very, very important to learn to get on with people that we don't historically necessarily understand. And this is around diversity and objectification of pushing people away, refugees and all sorts of people. But also the best time to do that work is with someone who is similar to you, speaks the same language, has a lot of common ground that you don't get on with for some reason or the other, is find ways of getting on with that person. Not easy, but there's a huge amount of growth that arises out of being able to do that. There really is. I really encourage everyone to stick with it.
The group isn't about the conflict, and as much as we care and love for each other, the work of the group is about the work of the group. So if anybody has a commitment to it and has shown a commitment to it and has shown up again and again, then let that person come back in. Because we had actually stated a strong mission for the group that was more important to us than our personal pain, I know that I was able to reorient on that purpose, and I was able to say, okay, I don't like myself very well. I don't like what's happening, but I am committed to this group, and I'm going to keep trying to do the work. And I actually feel like crying because I don't want to let anybody think that that was easy. It was very, very difficult, but we kept going.
So sometimes it's also, if you're not involved in conflicts, it's also helpful to reach out to others who are, and encourage them to work through the conflict. And while this conflict resolution work is incredibly painful, I don't think there's an easy course you can go on that will teach you more about yourself. So I'm going to say something pretty odd now. I'm going to say welcome conflict. Don't create it, but welcome conflict and welcome it as an opportunity for the group to shift. Because our circle became so much more intimate after we'd gone through that process.
The intention isn't to get to the bottom of who's right or who's wrong, and the intention definitely isn't to change the other person, but through creating a space for really deep whole body listening, we can learn more about ourselves, learn more about the conditions in which we flourish and the conditions in which we are more challenged, and we can learn more about the other person. We can learn how to adjust the way we work with them.
We're indoctrinated to behave in particular ways. We're trained into it from the time that we are infants, and it's completely unconscious. And part of what comes from working in a group like ours or other circles forming around other topics, other themes, other geographic areas, is the opportunity it gives you to be a different version of yourself. So take it. Challenge yourself. It's uncomfortable, it hurts, but oh my God, is it rewarding to break some of that conditioning and to bring more of your humanity into the spaces where you are operating.
Conflict and disagreement and diversity of views are really welcome. The conflict aversion that we've learnt can show up as consensus all the time, or a sense of false homogeneity. And by really welcoming conflict and celebrating minority views, what if you're the only one in a group that sees things differently? How welcome do you feel voicing that? By celebrating it, it's part of the usually invisible work of decolonizing and diversity, and it's not something that's usually touched on in standard diversity and inclusion training.
We need to sit on the fire when things get tough. We need to sit on the fire and pull all the tools that we have. You don't just surrender and declare failure from the beginning when conflict arises. We need to come into the circle and find a way to face this. Yeah, rather than just saying, this is not my place. As soon as something happens, I'm leaving. Yeah. When two brave people do that work, then they're doing it for the whole community, you know.
And again, it's this sense that our hyper-individual modern culture has told us that this is all about me, and it isn't. Conflict is something which is made possible because of the structures, systemic factors, and resolving conflict or transforming through conflict is something which is in service for the collective, for the community, for the group, for the organization, wherever it's happening. One of the other principles that is really important to me, and that I have now learned ways to put into practice, is the fact that we are all one, and that is sometimes it sometimes can be weaponized in work around social justice, dismantling racism or gender, when people say, oh, we're all one anyway, and I don't see colour, or I don't see you in terms of your gender. I've been graced to have had more than a few moments in my life of direct lived experience of that oneness, that interconnectedness. So when I am in a conflict, when I experience conflict in relationship in my life, it's not always possible to remember, but I have an intention to remember that I am just one part of the mystery of life in the universe, talking to itself. I feel like I'm separate. My lived experience is that I'm Katie Carr and another person is another person, but I'm not. We're all speaking with unique voices, but from the same source. And the reason why that's important, part of the reason is knowing we can't be harmed. That in this moment, a part of life has chosen, or if you give it a sense of agency, which I don't, this instant, maybe you've chosen unconsciously this moment as an opportunity for healing. So the other is a mirror to our own unhealed emotional wounds. And another reason why this sense of we are all one is important is that it's not a way to flatten difference. It's a way to give validity and equivalency, and to respect the diversity that arises.
I know we've spoken a lot about conflict, but it is going to come up, as Nanti says. If you're working in deep adaptation with collapse, you are going to come into conflict.